Okay, let's get started. I'm not too happy with the quality of my camera on this laptop, on this computer, uh, new use computer I have. But anyway, we'll get through this. You don't need to see my ugly face. So anyway, this video here kind of started as a series of emails, and I thought you'd be interested in hearing that, and I'm just going read the emails, but I'm recording this on November 9th, 2024, 35 years ago. Today it was at the nighttime when I was coming back to my barracks. My roommate said, "Yeah, oh, they're taking down the Berlin Wall," and I said, "That's BS," because my roommate would have a tendency to tell tall tales, and uh, so I didn't believe him at the time until I saw the news the next day. It actually was coming down. I just didn't believe it at the time. So it's very interesting to me being in Germany and witnessing history, a very historical event for those of us who remember that. I know it might seem like a long time ago to some of our younger viewers. So anyway, let's get on with it. This started as a series of emails. With the Seminole War Foundation, we received an email from John Rees, who's working on a book that's coming out this January 2025. Don Trilioli's Black Soldiers in America's War. Let's see if I can bring that up here. Here it is. And look for it wherever books are sold. It's supposed to have a lot of really nice paintings in it. I think you might even do a painting of a Black Seminole warrior, but um, just the information he gave of what they're putting into it, just like several pages of conflict. So even this antebellum period, it covers more than enough. Um, so from the French and Indian War to the War of 1812, American Civil War, War of Independence, not all in that area, but magnificent artwork on this. I'm sure y'all will have a lot of fun with this. So we're having some emails back and forth. I mentioned that, from the Army Navy Chronicles and most of what I've seen, um, they're the Seminoles, mostly the Black Warriors in the Seminole War. A lot of them fought on the Seminole side, but there were guides and interpreters. Um, so, from I guess one of the uh, previews of the book, it says Black soldiers have been a constant but ghostly presence in all of America's conflict from Lexington and Concord onward, ignored by most artists and overlooked until recently by most historians. This handsome volume helps bring them to life. It authoritatively chronicles all that they did and shows things that they carried and the uniforms they proudly wore. So that's going to be great. Uh, s- yeah. Sorry, mate, going through all the pages here. Yeah, some of the references, for example, the Army Navy Chronicle gives us a little glimpse of into them, and especially also in the 1830s, it was talking about some black soldiers from the Revolutionary War who were still alive at the time. So that's pretty cool. So let's see what Archie Marshall has to say. You may know him from the reenactments from the past 40 years. He's usually at Fort Cooper because he lives not far from there and at Dade Battlefield and Fort Foster, but very knowledgeable guy. And he has some well-researched information that he just poured on out here. So I'm going to read it to you because it's well documented stuff. And and this is Dunlawton Plantation Ruins in Port Orange, Florida, a park, a local park that you can visit today. And this from a postcard about 100 years ago. Uh, the Black Scouts were the most notable small group acting with the U.S. forces from first to last in the Second Seminole War. Early in 1836, Ben Wiggins acted as a guide of the Mosquito Roars of Major Putnam's battalion of Florida militia at the Battle of Dunwatan. You see the ruins of Dunwatan here. And they kind of lost that battle here, or they got chased out. James Orman, among them, recalled Wiggins was the foremost in the action, said the undisciplined rabble were made a disorderly retreat. Some of their men were left behind, but an old mulatto guide, old Ben Wiggins, brought some order to the fleeing men with admonition. My God, gentlemen, is you going to run from the passel of damned Indians? And that's Major Putnam, Benjamin Putnam, right there. Major Putnam gave the command to stop the retreat, and firing was resumed for a time. Then an order was given again to retreat to the boats. Ben Wiggins was said to have been present in the war during the War of 1812, Patriot War, in the service of the Spanish at the ambush of 12 Mile Swamp, which resulted in the death of Captain John Williams of the U.S. Marine Corps, which did a video here a few weeks ago, which you can go back and see. The scouting service, of course, was deadly. For others, Billy John or Indian Billy, this is not him, by the way. A free black Seminole was killed in action at the head of a column of Tennessee volunteers in October 1836 while attempting to cross Panasoffkee Outlet. That was what led to the Battle of Wahoo Swamp in November 1836. Late in the war, John Horse or John Cavallo, also called Gopher John, and this is him, was notable among the Black Seminole Scouts. Captain John T. Sprague, and this is a picture he did of him in his book, recalled the Battle of Pawcakahahammock in 1842, which was the last organized battle of the war on April 19th, 1842, near Lake Apopka, near today what's called the town of Claremont. Okay, the tall figure of the Negro interpreter Gopher John, his loud voice and Negro accent, the repeated discharge of his unerring rifle, well known to the Indians as he was, made a conspicuous object of the assault. The balls flew by him so thick, striking the trees around, that he suspected his courage was oozing out, and when pulling from his pocket a well-filled flask, "Gaudy, master," he said to the officer by his side, "I feel all over mighty queer. The Injuns fight so strong. I must take a big un." And suiting the action to the word, he drained his bottle, reprimed his rifle, whooped, and was soon lost in the mist of foliage and smoke. Definitely a brave man. He went to Indian Territory, and later on in life, he became a Buffalo Soldier in the 1880s in New Mexico area, and is probably about 70 years old at that time. Among the U.S. forces in the war, Army officers, uh, the territory occasionally employed servants, generally slaves, under various state laws. An unnamed servant was evidently among the corpses buried with Major Dade's command in early 1836. We're not talking about Louis Pacheco. Major Dade apparently had another servant who was killed, and his name is lost from history at the moment. Notable, and these are some of we know, of course, Abraham here, who was first Micanopy servant and became interpreter uh, for the Seminoles employed by the United States during the Second Seminole War. He went to Indian Territory out west and became famous out there. Notable Lieutenant Colonel William S. Foster of the 4th U.S. Infantry, and this is his diary published by the Seminole War, The Miserable Pride of a Soldier. And he spends a lot of his time complaining that he's passed up for promotion. Uh, when he's more deserving of a brevet colonel other than some others who were passed up in front of him. His servant Greennow aided him in action in Florida, carrying messages for him, described in this book, which is sold by the Seminole War Foundation. I'll put a link in the comment in the video description down below. Edom, the Negro servant of Captain Malone's troops of Georgia Mounted Volunteers in 1836, was killed in an ambush on the trains of Winfield Scott's column in March 1836. Oh, not that. Which fate was narrowly escaped by a few others. Florida militia muster rolls show several servants, almost certainly slaves, acted as servants to the officers in the company of federal services. Among them, Alex served with Gonzales Company, 1st Regiment, 1st Brigade, Florida Militia. Sam Scott was a servant with Captain Scott's Company, 5th Florida Mounted Militia, DuPont's. Neptune and Sam acted with Langford's Company of Florida Volunteers, 1839 to 1840. There was Luke, who was servant of Captain Waterman's Company of Warren's 1st Regiment of Florida Volunteers, 1837 to 1838. John served with Bailey's Company of Warren's 1st Regiment of Mounted Volunteers, 1837 to 38. John and Gabriel, captain servants with Johnson's Company, Florida Mounted Volunteers, 1839 to 1840. And Bill Tucker's Company, 2nd East Florida Mounted Volunteers. So quite a lot in service, even if they are slaves and servants of the officers of the Florida Militia. Besides camp and body servants, some Southern Militia and volunteer corps employed in the U.S. service in Florida, there were also some Black Company musicians. And now we'll talk about this guy, Jordan Noble. Among the units which had at least one Black musician present was Colonel Percifer F. Smith's Regiment of Louisiana Volunteer Militia in 1836, which was evidently accompanied by drummer Jordan Noble, who had been present at the Battle of New Orleans in 1815, and various services are well known. Smith's regiment was present at the burial of Major Dade's company in February 1836, in the siege of Camp Izard, and through the campaign of General Winfield Scott, concluding in May 1836. So Colonel Percifer Smith started off with the Louisiana Volunteers, came to Florida with General Winfield Scott, or General Gaines, I'm sorry, with General Gaines's campaign that buried Major Dade at the Battle of Camp Izard, so he saw a lot of action. He was commissioned in the Army as a regular officer and was in Florida the next 2 years, mostly in Southwest Florida with the Louisiana Volunteers. I think he is part of the campaign, Jessup's three-pronged campaign that led to the Battle of Okeechobee under Zachary Taylor. Percifer Smith was head of the different column in the Southwest Florida. So about Jordan Noble, he became quite a historical figure, well known in New Orleans. He was, at the age of 14, a drummer boy with the 7th Infantry at the Battle of New Orleans. Here is his grave in one of the famous cemeteries in New Orleans, and a plaque about him. Of course, after the Battle of New Orleans, he was a slave and traded around officers with his mother around various plantations, but one of his masters encouraged his musical ability and actually sent him to music school or training. It says on the plaque he was sent to the Everglades in Florida in 1817. Actually, it should be probably 1836 and 1837. He was in the Mexican-American War as a musician in the 5th Regiment of Louisiana Volunteers in 1847. And during the Civil War, General Benjamin Butler, uh, the Union uh, occupation commander, made Jordan Noble, I guess, a general in charge of the uh, city's emancipated soldiers. Jordan Noble was at Congo Square during the Emancipation celebration. Also met Abraham Lincoln, uh, I believe. Uh, in 1876, he was presented the National Badge of Veterans of the Mexican-American War and granted full membership in the society. In 1884, he beat his drum at the World's Fair in New Orleans. He died on June 20th, 1890 in New Orleans. So he lived in New Orleans pretty much all the 19th century and saw a lot of changes in history from drummer with Andrew Jackson, slave to free man, a general in the Union Army at one point. What a life. These are the Macon Volunteers at Fort Cooper, painting by Jackson Walker. Charlie Benger of Macon, Georgia, a free black man, was a fifer with the Macon Volunteers and accompanied them as part of Major Mark Anthony Cooper's battalion of Georgia foot soldiers to Florida in 1836 after their active service. He continued in that capacity, including service with the company in the Confederate Army until his discharge in 1862 of old age. Just letting you know, old age at the time was 45. So, uh, I mean, at my age, I'd probably be dead if I was that old. And in the Second Seminole War, the Swamp Sailors, George E. Bunker, uh, written quite a while back, but a really good book. This is my old copy here, but I actually have um, a it's still in print, I believe, but just has a better cover than this. And you look around, you can probably find a copy on eBay or something if it's not in publication. U.S. Navy participated a great deal in the Second Seminole War and at the time enlisted free men of color. Some served in the vessels blockading and scouting Florida coast. Others served inland during the winter of 1837 to 1838. Lieutenant Levin Powell's detachment of U.S. Navy personnel, including a number of men of color, Assistant Sergeant Jacob R. Mott of the Army, recalled them drilling with some regular troops attached to their command in South Florida. And here's what Jacob Mott says in the book Journey into Wilderness, his diary. He wrote of Powell's men drilling. When drawn up in the line, they presented a curiously blending of black and white, like the keys of piano forte. Many of the sailors being colored men, there was also an odd alternation of tarpaulin hats and pea jackets with forage caps and soldiers roundabouts, soldiers and sailors, white men and black, all thrown into the ranks indiscriminately, a beautiful specimen of a mosaic, thus modifying sailors' ardor with the soldiers' discipline. Such a interesting description. I love how he writes that, and you can see integrated force, totally integrated, but wearing quite an ensemble and mishmash of uniforms. The force, accompanied by some troops, and Mr. Joseph E. Johnson, late of the Army, engaged in combat of Jupiter Inlet, January 15th, 1838, in which the command was nearly overwhelmed and escaped destruction with great difficulty. The command falling to Johnson practically for his gallantry in this action. He was accepted back in the Army with active service until his resignation to serve the Confederacy in 1861. Joseph E. Johnson, I believe he was in the artillery, and he resigned right before the battle, and he was still with them to assist. and his acting the artillery saved the command from being wiped out at Powell's Battle, which you can visit the site of the battle in Palm Beach County at Riverside Battlefield Park. Uh, and they reenact the Battle of Waxahachie each year, two battles at the same site. The reenactments in usually about the fourth weekend of January. While Negroes were not included in the general militia laws uh, of Territory of Florida, in February 1840, the territorial government, under their Slave Act, passed a law barring the use of guns except for arming the slaves by their master for purposes of defense. And the law says, provided, nevertheless, that this act shall not be so construed to prevent any owner or other person or persons having charge of slaves, free Negroes, or mulattoes from arming them in defense of their person or property against the Indians or any other people at war with citizens of the territory. That's straight from the territorial laws. Somewhat relative to the above, a slave of John Hope was credited with killing a Seminole warrior while hunting. So sometimes the slaves would be armed to go hunting and bring food. It was reported by a Mr. John Delaney, lately from Fort Tarver on Payne's Prairie, that a Negro slave of Mr. John Hope was hunting in Tarver's field when he discovered five Indians in the act of carrying off corn. Being armed with a double-barreled shotgun charged with slugs, he immediately fired on them and killed one of the Indians on the spot. The other four immediately fled when he discharged his second shot, wounding one severely. Uh, Indians would quite often raid the fields around Fort Tarver, Payne's Prairie, and McIntosh in that area. Besides the above, it was noted four families had been massacred in the vicinity of New River. A company of dragoons was reported en route to pursue the attackers. And that is from the New York Observer newspaper, August 29th, 1840. I'm not sure if that's the New River down in Fort Lauderdale or I think there's a New River up near Middleburg in Clay County. So I'd have to look at if I could look up the whole description and find out. But anyway, also during the same period, U.S. ordnance officers provided arms to some of the farmers yet in war-torn East Florida, white and black. Major Wilcox, Fifth Infantry, ordered on the 24th of June, 1841, to discharge duties in reference to the settlers adopted at once strenuous efforts to induce settlement. Citizens that fled the plantations going down. Arms and ammunition were issued to every man in settlement, white or black. Troops erected blockhouses, place a rendezvous in defense if assailed by the Indians, and the army issued rations allowed to each white person and half rations to each slave, which, so they're, they're just as big as, if not taller than the white man, but only giving them half the food. That's not good. Uh, this was promised until the next crop season. Uh, Major Wilcox died in St. Augustine on 5th of January, 1842, and I think he's buried in St. Francis Cemetery. Okay, and anyway, a lot of interesting descriptions. Archie Marshall as well researched, and I hope you enjoyed this. So you can see that actually we've talked about the Black Seminoles in the past, but they also had a critical role serving the Army and the militia at the time as well, and what duties they could. So I hope you thought this interesting, and hope you thought this interesting. So let's uh, carry on. This weekend's Veterans Weekend, so it's a busy weekend for me. I'm in Tallahassee and they have the Veterans Day on the 11th. Every time we have the Veterans Breakfast at the American Legion Hall in the morning, followed by the parade. I probably won't be in the parade this time because they have a limited number of who can fit on the parade float, and they want to make this parade in honor of the Purple Heart. I'm not a Purple Heart recipient, so I'll leave room for somebody who certainly is is does have that honor with them. So anyway, enough for now, and we'll talk to you later.